Good morning, everyone. In this lecture, we will study Thomas Hardy and his theatre work or his inclination towards theatres. So, Hardy's interest in theatre dated from 1860s. Means in this decade, we see his inclination towards theatres. He corresponded with various would-be adapters over the years, including Robert Louis Stevenson in 1886 and Jack Green and Charles Jarvis in the same decade. Neither adaptation came to fruition, but Hardy showed he was potentially enthusiastic about such a project. Means he let the authors or adapters adapt his novels into play form that could be performed in the theaters. So he was enthusiastic about this project. One play that was performed, however, caused him a certain amount of pain. His experience of the controversy and lukewarm critical reception that had surrounded him and Comnescar's adaptation of The Far from the Madding Crowd in 1882, which left him wary of the damage the adaptation could do to his literary reputation. So, Thomas Hardy in 1908 so readily and enthusiastically became involved with a local amateur group at the time known as the Dorchester Dramatic and Debating Society that later came to be known as Hardy's Player. Means this group played the novels or whatever he wrote in the theaters. His reservations about adaptations of his novels meant he was initially at some pains to disguise his involvement in the play. However, the international success of the play, The Trumpet Major, led to a long and successful collaboration between Hardy and the players. The players means Hardy's players over the remaining years of his life. Indeed, his play, the famous tragedy of The Queen of Cornwall at Tintagel in Lyonesse, 1923, was written to be performed by the Hardy's players. It was a drama and tragedy also. From the 1880s, Hardy became increasingly involved in the campaigns to save ancient buildings from destruction or destructive modernization, and he became an early member of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. His correspondence refers to his unsuccessful efforts to prevent major alterations to the parish church at Purltown, close to his home at Maxgate. Thomas Hardy became a frequent visitor at Ethelhampton House, which he knew from his teenage years, and in his letters he encouraged the owner, Alfred Card de la Fontaine, to conduct the restoration of that building in a sensitive way. In 1914, Hardy was one of the 53 leading British authors, including H.G. Wells, Rudyard Kipling, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who signed their names to the author's declaration justifying Britain's involvement in the First World War. This manifesto declared that the German invasion of Belgium had been a brutal crime and that Britain could not, without dishonor, have refused to take part in the present war. Hardy was horrified by the destruction caused by the war, pondering that I would not think a world in which such fiendishness is possible to be worth the saving, and better to let Western civilization perish and let the black and yellow races have a chance. Thomas Hardy wrote to John Galsworthy that the exchange of international thought is the only possible salvation for the world. Shortly after helping to excavate the Fordington mosaic, Hardy became ill with pleurisy in December 1927 and died at Maxgate just after 9 p.m. on 11 January 1928. 8. Having dedicated his final poem to his poem on his deathbed, the cause of death was cited on his death certificate as cardiac syncope with old age, given as a contributory factor. His funeral was on 16 January at Westminster Abbey, and it proved a controversial occasion because Hardy had wished for his body to be interred at Stinsford in the same grave as his first wife Emma. His family and friends concurred, however, his executor, Sir Sidney Carlyle Cockerell, insisted that he be placed in the Abbey's famous Poets' Corner. A compromise was reached whereby his heart was buried at Stinsford with Emma and his assets in Poets' Corner. Opening chapter of the Mayor of Casterbridge, for example, written in 1886, was based on press reports of wife selling. Shortly after Hardy's death, the executor of his estate burned his letters and notebooks, but 12 notebooks survived, one of them containing notes and extracts of newspaper stories from 1820s, and research into these has provided insight into how Hardy used them in his works. In the year of his death, Mrs. Hardy published The Early Life of Thomas Hardy, 1841-1891, compiled largely from contemporary notes, letters, diaries, and biographical memoranda, as well as from oral information in conversations extending over many years. Hardy's work was admired by many younger writers, including D.H. Lawrence, John Cowper, Boyce, and Virginia Woolf. In his autobiography, Goodbye to All That, 1929, Robert Graves recalls meeting Hardy in Dorset in an early 1920s and how Hardy received him and his new wife warmly and was encouraging about his work. Hardy's birthplace is Bockhampton, and his house Maxgate, both in Dorchester, are owned by National Trust. So, friends, we had an insight into the theatre and the interest in theatres and the adaptations that Thomas Hardy let the adapters do of his novels, and the group that performed Hardy's novels on stage. So, friends, that is all about the interest in theaters of Thomas Hardy. We will meet in the next lecture.